Hello, 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 and welcome to another live stream here on the Here to Record YouTube channel. Today, we're going to talk mostly software related things, fun software in the NDI world. I am joined by someone who's been building all sorts of tools for NDI. Elias, nice to have you here. How's it going?
Dude, it's good to be here. Thank you for having me on. It is good to see you again.
Pleasure. We've chatted a couple of times over the last few years, and I was hoping to sync with you at NAB, but it never happened. But for folks who aren't familiar with who you are, what you do, just give us like a little background on what you think got us to the point where we're chatting here on this live stream.
Sure. So I mean, I did live events back in high school, part of the AV team, and then from there got into software development, did my whole university undergrad, and then after that got asked by a friend, "Hey, do you have a event app that could track people at conferences?" Built that and through a whole series of events, I got back into live event production, and then I found H2R graphics because I needed some good titling. And then from there, you and I have chatted a whole bunch, and yeah, here we are. It's been a wild journey over the last couple of years of getting into NDI and having lots of fun with all that stuff.
Cool. Yeah, well, we're going to dig into some fun tools that you've been building for NDI pretty soon, but it would be a shame not to mention who's helping us and co-hosting the show today, Jonas, who's a regular on the channel. Hello, Jonas. Are you there?
Hey, welcome. Uh, Glad to be back. I'm this time the more stressed one because I'm doing the show, and you can just be talking about all the things and hope that I can catch up with the cutting. But good to be back.
One of the hardest things I'm finding here is just sitting here with my arms, crossed and not pressing buttons and messing with things. So it's actually
You got to
quite
be the
a
host.
yeah, I usually like to do both and it's a fun juggle, but today I just get to relax a bit and take it easy and chat with you. And
Dude, just set up a stream deck and just punch buttons at random.
that's true. I have several here. I could just press the buttons anyway. Who knows what I'll press? You're probably connected to something, so I'll break something. Um, I just want to say hello to all the folks as well watching along. Thanks for joining in. From Germany and Italy and all over the place. Rob jumping in as well. Thanks for being here. Andre from a train. Nice to see you. Thanks so much. So in the comments below or in the description, sorry, of this live stream, I've listed all of your fun tools that we're going to talk about. And the first one, let's say that I have been most excited about because it fits perfectly into what I tend to do, which is HTML graphics. And for so long, people have asked me in H2R graphics, how do I turn the output, the browser output, into an NDI stream so I can send it around the network and use it in things like vMix or other software tools? And then you and I had a chat at one point, and next thing I know, you had this awesome little tool. So let's dig into, HTML for NDI and what you're building there, and just do a little quick demo for people out there who haven't seen what you're up to in terms of HTML and overlays.
Yeah, sure. So one of the one of the gaps I was trying to fill for myself was just being able to present for example, at for hybrid internal town halls that we produced, is take the Slido feed or take whatever engagement feed they want to use
Mm,
for that event, turn that into an HTML source so that I can throw it up on the downstage monitors, right? And I cobbled together a really quick utility that basically just wraps a Chrome browser and allows me to turn whatever page we're on into a NDI source, but it includes alpha. The
nice.
fun part was when I built that tool and alpha just worked out of the box. I didn't even plan for alpha to work at first. I thought I was going to have to do some custom work, and then it worked.
How
And
often
it's
does that
just
happen?
the pardon?
How often does that actually happen? It
Dude,
just
never.
works.
It never ever happens just out of the box.
Yeah.
So I'm actually going to switch to a different camera source here on my
Mhm.
screen share,
Do it.
and we can jump to the screen share actually. So I've got just basic studio monitor pulled up right now, and I've got it tuned into one of my cameras. But this HTML5 graphics brought to you by H2R Graphics,
Ooh,
that is the HTML to NDI source that I've built. And that's just tuned into an H2R graphics instance. I'm controlling this with Companion, and it's being sent out with alpha. So if I go back to just H2R, if I go to H2R solo, I got another studio monitor here. This just shows up as just another NDI source on your
mm,
network.
mm. So you can just
You
pull
know,
that into whatever you're. I always say vMix because that's what I just use. But like, if you had some hardware box that had NDI and sources available, you could just pull this up just like any other NDI source, right?
yeah, exactly. Just
Yeah.
like any other NDI source.
Mm,
And if you're using like vMix or other tools, like you just take that and you just take the source, do alpha overlay, and you're done, right?
yeah.
So now, so you can run your H2R wherever you want to, send that out as an NDI source, and you're ready to bring in really beautiful HTML graphics super fast, right?
And
So,
I'm gonna annoy you about this one little thing, but
yes, sir.
is there a way to launch this super easy, or isn't is this is a command line tool, right? And question one is when will it be like click to install? That's my go-to question.
Click to install. So I'm I it has a basic HTML API around it.
Okay.
The way that I've coded it and the way that I code the majority of my tools now is it's just I try to keep them as portable as possible because I want to keep them as cross-platform as possible.
Hmm.
Like one of the biggest feature requests I have is make this run on Linux.
Yeah.
So that is in the pipeline. I've also been asked if we get this running on Mac OS. The short answer to that is that's going to be an absolute nightmare to make work properly because Mac OS is Mac OS.
Yeah,
As
I think I asked you that instantly as well, so apologies.
so I was coming back from NAV 24. I was late getting in and I missed my transport home. So I was stuck at the airport for like 12 hours. I had to do that fun math right after the conference of like, is it is it worth it to get a hotel to just get 4 hours of sleep? Like, do
Yeah,
I really want to
barely.
pay like $400 to just get a nap?
Hmm.
So I decided to stay up and see, hey, can I make Chromium Extensible Framework CEF work with Mac OS and an NDI wrapper? And the short answer was not easily, not easily. So Mac's the thing.
That's not a no though.
It's not a no, but one day maybe.
Yeah.
It's been asked by a few people, so I'm thinking about it. In terms of a easy to launch or at least a UI around it,
Mhm.
that is something I want to build. I do want to put a nice UI around it, like a web controller of some sort, kind of like we have either for H2R, or, any of the other tools I've got.
Yeah.
So that's in the pipeline.
Cool. Cool. But for now, um, people can visit the link below, which brings them to the GitHub, which I'm looking at. And then you've been actually pretty helpful in showing how to launch it and stuff. So, and I know you were extremely helpful whenever I tried to do it, quickly answering questions and stuff. So, um, it's easy to get going, and then once you have it launched, it's perfect. It works exactly as you want it to. So that's excellent. I love it because it's exactly the kind of thing that I know Jonas too. People have asked like,
Yeah.
oh, when is Play It B coming to NDI or NDI coming to Play It B, right?
Well, and like it's funny when you say, "Oh, like is it easy to launch and all that?" I'm like, "Yeah, it is. It's like just a command line tool. You just put it in the script. It's super cool because like I don't need to like manage this whole GUI and like all of the things in like the automation side that I do a lot of right now where like my current fight is, hey, can I get everything without a GUI and instead with an API, please? And thank you. Um, but of course, that is a very unique
Yeah,
developer focused subset
I think
compared to like the typical, I don't want the code, I just want the download. And
just yeah, one click, one click. Here, Rob,
yep.
just so we're super clear, Rob asks, so it's command line based and Windows for now, question mark.
Yes, that's correct.
Cool.
So it is command line on Windows. Uh, there's on the GitHub site where you can download the tool, there
Hmm.
is an example of how to launch it, take you to a test pattern site. It is there is an API as well. I haven't documented it yet, but there are APIs as well to do a little bit of interactivity on the page. For example, click, scroll, enter keystrokes. Keystroke one seems to be hit and miss sometimes. I'm trying to figure out why that is.
Hmm.
But yeah, right now, command line based on Windows with a full HTTP API around it. So, for example, if you're using something like Companion, should we try to do a quick demo? Should we
Oh,
try to do
we're
something
here to do
live?
demos. This is exactly
Okay.
where we want to see things.
All right,
I
cool.
was going to
Let's
say break,
break.
but no, succeed.
Let's break things. All right.
Here we
So
go.
what port? So I'm gonna pull up Companion here, and I'm gonna double check what port this is running on. So I've got it running on port 9999 right now.
Hmm.
So I'm gonna add a HTTP post. Uh, I'm just using a generic HTTP post request here. My URL is gonna be it's running on Tractus Laptop 5 9999. Set URL, and I'm gonna try and set the URL to. Let's see here. Well, let's do H2R graphics. Let's see if we can go to H2R graphics.
It'll be my fault then if it breaks.
That's the spirit. So that'll be h2r.graphics. So
Nice.
URL h2r, and then I'm going to do another one, which will be the URL will be whatever URL it's at right now, which was Tracks Laptop 4001 output NEZS, which I can just copy from H2R. By the way, H2R graphics, you should all be using it. I'm not just saying that because John's here. I'm saying that because it's genuinely good.
Put that on the website as a little quote.
There you go.
I'm not just saying that because
Okay.
John's listening. It is good.
All right. So that's programmed. Let me go back to the correct studio monitor and I will go to H2R Solo, which should take me to H2R graphics or that output. All right. HTML site. Ah, it
Ta-da!
works. It even includes the alpha on your
It
website.
does. I should probably put
How,
non-alpha on there. Oh,
how
that's
freaking
nice.
cool is that?
That's cool. So
And if I,
you're
and
just
there we go.
pressing
And
those command buttons or companion buttons there to
yeah,
push the
exactly. Yeah.
URL. I mean, that's really
Yeah,
cool.
I'm just pressing those. So if I actually, what I'll do is I'll bring up the emulator right next to what we're doing here,
Hmm.
so everybody can see it. I should have probably prepared this a little earlier, but that's okay.
No, I like it done on the fly.
Y'all forgive me. All right, there we go. So if I punch URL H2R site, there we go. Takes us to the site. So that's changed the URL, and then there we go. So I can switch between the two.
Yeah.
I'd have to go back into the source code to remember how to actually do scroll. I would
Ah, you have that.
eventually there are API commands to do scroll and interaction on the page.
Hmm. Very
What I
nice.
want to add though is, and this has been on the back of my mind for a while, is so you know how in screen if you're using screen capture HX from NDI tools that you can
Hmm.
do KVM, right?
Hmm.
So doing that, adding that to this using the advanced SDK would not be too difficult. So
Ah,
I'd like to eventually add pass through KVM so that you could actually interact with this page
that's really cool.
instead of just doing it through the API.
You actually stumbled on a question that I usually have when it comes to NDI things, and Michael Lang does say in the chat, free HTML to NDI rendering. This is so cool. Um,
Cool,
how
Michael.
does how does I always forget how does pricing for you as a developer work when it comes to something like NDI? Do you have to license that? I'm guessing not because you're giving this away as a free tool, but do they have pricing in there for developers as well?
So it depends on the version of the SDK that you're using. So
Mm,
as of today, if you're using the free SDK, my understanding is that if you build a product and ship it, you can ship it basically royalty free. There's no extra licensing fees that you have to pay. Now, if you want more features from the NDI SDK, for example, KVM,
Mm,
custom memory allocators.
right.
What else is in there in the advanced SDK that we're using? Oh, a big one in the SDK that we use is, I'm using this on another project, is being able to say to the SDK, instead of decoding the frame for me, I want you to just give me the raw compressed frame,
Uh,
whether it's an HX source, whether it's a full bandwidth source. Like if it's speed HQ, H264, H265, don't decode it, just give it to me.
mhm,
The advanced SDK gives you more control over that.
right. Okay.
And then there's also, and if you're obviously if you're in hardware as well, the advanced SDK also includes some FPGA starter packs. So if you're feeling extra nerdy, go download the advanced SDK.
It
Which
also
you
gives
are.
you 10-bit pipelines in
Mm,
HDR.
Yes.
wow.
So the free SDK, you can find out if the source is an HDR source, but when if you decode it, you just get, if you use the basic SDK, you'll just get a regular 8-bit source back. The advanced SDK, yeah, you can get you can get the, I was going to say H2R decoding, HDR decoding.
If only.
Um,
Okay, cool. That's great.
yeah. Oh, and the other one with the advanced SDK, I think this is the big one for software developers or anybody that's developing solutions around NDI and
Hmm.
wanting to use HX output. The
Yes.
only way to do HX output today is using the advanced SDK.
Okay, got it. Which you have to pay
Yeah.
for on a
Which
per
so
person?
the so full disclosure, I've got an NDI advanced license. My company has an NDI advanced license. Elias doesn't personally have an NDI advanced license. So yay, legal entities and all that stuff. Um, the terms, the license terms are generally covered under NDA, so I can't speak to the specifics
Okay,
about that.
cool.
But yeah, there's like most people that I've talked to that have, or most companies I've talked to that have an advanced license, there's some sort of royalty arrangement per unit shipped.
I see. I see. Okay, cool. Well, but we're not here to talk about, I guess, all that. That's more for, I'll ask you in my own time about these sorts of things then. We want to
Yeah.
see your cool tools. So you showed the companion buttons jumping between those two URLs. If somebody in a month's time wants to do exactly what you just did, is there a good documentation area that you have that they can head towards and see how to, because you don't have a companion module there. You were punching in your own on the custom HTTP, right?
Yeah, so right now I'm using the basic HTTP module to
Yes.
do the punching, right?
Mm,
So, and what I was actually showing off, so if the Studio Monitor instance that I have up right now, along with the companion layout that I've got right now,
mhm.
you may have noticed that I had 2 or 3 rows of buttons set up,
Right.
and I was punching between the URL and the H2R website.
Mhm.
So I also have a second row of buttons that's controlling my router, which is controlling what goes into my studio monitor output,
I
or at
see.
least, or one of the studio monitor outputs. So Jonas has got, shout out Jonas, put together a companion module for my router tool.
Hmm.
And between him and I, we're going to make that thing awesome, make that available so that you can control router natively from companion as well.
Oh, are we talking about the units that we have here in pressing
Yes.
the buttons? Okay, yeah, I just wanted to
Yeah,
make sure.
the
The
one
one
that
and
gave me
only?
the demo of CloudFlex, even though he was sick.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
He's a real worker, that lad.
That was so cool.
Yeah, it was.
that
That was
was
so fun.
uh, it's has been quite fun for a little context. I sadly wasn't able to be at NAB,
That's right.
so what I was able to do is talk to John and Elias remotely through space comms. Because what else would you want to use to talk to someone remotely, right?
Yeah,
It's a lot of fun.
I love it. That was quite the experience. Listen, it was kind of like usual though. I usually listen to Jonas through headphones because we're usually chatting on Zoom and stuff, but it felt surreal to be in a different time zone doing the same thing.
Real talk for a moment. I find NAB and conferences slightly disorienting now because I can hear people. It's not focused audio anymore, so I actually have to spend time focusing on and half the time I have my head turned so that I have one ear that's focused on somebody.
Yeah, I was constantly like just listening in, tuning in to somebody speaking just so I could focus. Yeah, I was doing that too. It's quite a
I know
strange.
it's really weird.
Yeah, it is.
It's weird.
Um, so yes, I'm excited for this HTML graphics related because of course I'm super into that stuff. But switching to tool number two, which we've listed below as well, you like to cause some chaos. Give us some background on the chaos generator for NDI.
Yes. So Chaos Generator for NDI, another command line tool. I'm going to I'm going to create this source. Again, my motivation behind this is I wanted to deliberately create a misbehaving NDI source.
Mhm.
And the motivation for that, I got a camera behind me. It's just one of the cheap, it's like, where is it? Oh, it's out
That's
right
right there.
now.
Ah,
It's out right now. That's why it's not behind me. So I should probably check which rental that's on.
job
Anyway,
for later.
um, no, I know what rental it's on, and we're using the HDMI output for that. So we're bypassing. So context of this is I had got two kind of generic OEM cameras, right? And they said, oh, it's got NDI output. And I found for a while that it was, I was having a bit of issue with, with these cameras and the NDI output when I was operating a 1080p 60,
Mhm.
unless the settings were just absolutely right for the H.264 encoder.
Right.
And come to learn that there was a whole generation of cameras that came out that NDI HX output was really an afterthought. And
Uh,
I'm not going to mention specific manufacturers because it kind of affected a whole bunch of it affected a lot of generic OEM cameras. But and I'll actually give a little bit of background too about HX output and how it works. So in NDI, when you give the basic SDK frame data, you can give it to it in UIVY, or you can give it in RGBA, right?
mhm.
Or if you don't have any alpha, you just give RGB frames. If you want to send out an HX source, you are responsible for bringing your own H.264, H.265 encoder.
Mhm.
And you basically take that raw bit stream and put it into an NDI frame and send that out over the wire. So that's one interesting thing about the advanced SDK is it actually doesn't give you an H.264 265 encoder. You're still responsible for bringing
Huh.
that.
That surprises me. I just would have assumed that it did.
So, but think about the use case though, because the use case was, hey, there's all these cameras that do, uh, yeah, exactly. Michael just said in the chat that explains the inconsistencies.
Mm. Yeah, of
That's
course.
so. If you think about it, to get NDI, and there's also another misconception, which is that HX is just inherently lower latency. And I'm going to open another sidebar here before we get to Chaos Generator. I feel like
Okay.
we're two
I
sidebars
think
in.
we're two, at least two, and yeah,
We're two in. I have to
yeah.
say this, which is I'm not being paid by NDI to say this. I'm 100% independent, and the opinions and viewpoints that I express are mine.
Hmm.
Okay, cool. We're all good with
Okay,
that.
we're
I
with
don't
that. Yeah.
represent I don't. I have the NDI pin because I really like NDI, but
Mm.
I do not represent them.
Sure.
So opinions and viewpoints are my own. Okay, cool. Sidebar closed. Let's talk about HX. There's a misconception about HX that it is just inherently higher latency because it's compressed H.264, 265. Part of that comes from badly behaving encoders.
Mm.
So, for example, the generic OEM camera that I had before, it was set up just absolutely perfectly, and that took a lot of trial and error. I
Right.
can't say that, hey, I found the magic button. It was just like literally just fiddling at 2 in the morning with encoder settings until it worked.
Right.
A lot of those cameras, from what I can deduce, took their existing H.264 output and just rerouted it internally into NDI. That's all they did.
Okay.
So the downside of that, though, is to get a super low latency NDI HX output, your encoder has to be pretty much perfectly configured.
Yeah. Okay.
So no B frames. That's number one, is no B frames. That adds latency. Number two, and this is a big quirk as well of HX, is in the NDI SDK, the advanced SDK, there's an event that you can get that basically says, I need an iframe. Whatever you're doing, the
Mm,
next frame you generate must be an iframe.
right.
I have a new listener that's tuned in in order to decode this source, they need an iframe. And you are compelled, if you are a compliant HX source, you are compelled to give your next frame as an iframe.
Right.
Guess what some of those cameras don't do, right?
Yeah.
So you really, and so for HX, part of the reason why, and the NDI docs talk about this, that HX is not necessarily high latency because HX is high latency.
Mhm.
It's high latency because to configure an encoder out of the box to be low latency requires a fair amount of work.
Right.
This segues into what I'm working with on Chaos Generator and NDI and my Multiview for NDI, which is when I was going through and adding HX output support to my Multiview, I had to do a decent amount of work to make that HX stream, to make the H.264 encoder low latency.
Mm,
So disabling look ahead, disabling because the H.264 and 265 encoders will use the previous frame to infer the next frame and do a bit of prediction.
right.
Oversimplifying, all that stuff's kind of outside my pay grade, but that's kind of the directional gist of it, right?
Mhm.
So I had to do a lot of configuration. My hacky workaround to make HX work was just to do oops all iframes,
Right.
which provides the absolute lowest latency. The trade-off, though, is more bandwidth used.
Mm,
But it also means that any listener can tune in at any time, and I don't have to worry about saying to, for example, NVENC or OpenH264, hey, give me an iframe right now. I don't care what you're doing. Just give me the next frame you generate. Just give me an iframe. If I provide a I420 frame into NVENC on my 40, what's in this machine? A 4070? Yes. On the 4070 that's in this machine, I can get an H.264 iframe back in 3 milliseconds,
mm. Wow.
right? And then I can send, and that compressed frame can go out over the wire in less time than it takes a corresponding speed HQ, which is the full bandwidth codec. It can just go out on the wire even faster because there's just less data to transmit.
Right.
And then because the decoder on the other side, because it's an iframe, it has all the image data that it needs to decode that source.
Hmm.
So the decode's going to be a little bit faster and a little bit lower latency. Again, there's a class of cameras that came out. The OEM cameras especially are affected by this. I'm talking about if you go on Amazon.com or wherever and say NDI camera, and it's like one of those off brands, right?
Yeah, yeah.
That's those encoders generally tend to misbehave. And the behavior that I found that it exhibited was like, I'll have a frame time of like 22 milliseconds, but then I'll get a frame like 4 milliseconds later.
But did you
Right?
say
So
you
like,
could tune in these cameras and solve this if you knew where to fiddle, or will you kind of
so
just
some of those, like some of the
or
cameras, they provide control over like keyframe interval, bit
mm,
rate, all that stuff.
mhm.
The best I was able to do is basically just say, again, oops, all iframes, like keyframe interval of 1,
Right.
for example, and that reduced the problem. The the not glorious truth is that we worked around a fair amount of these problems by just running our productions at 30 frames per second and having the cameras run at 60. And if we drop a frame or a frame arrives too late, oh well, we're running at double the
Mm,
frame rate, so it
got
doesn't
it.
matter.
Yeah.
Not recommended. We've moved on from that, but that was the early days workaround.
But for the most part, better to stick with a camera that doesn't have this limitation then.
It's better to I will say this, stick to the brand names.
Yeah,
Stick to the brand names. They actually have customer support and people that care.
true. True.
This brings us back to Chaos
Yeah,
Generator,
we're back out of all the sidebars now, right?
right? So one of the reasons I created this program called Chaos Generator is I wanted an NDI source that would misbehave on command.
Right.
So for example, I want to say, again, in NDI, when you're setting up a sender, you can specify, I want NDI to generate my clock signal and essentially do vsync and all that stuff for me. Or you can put it in a mode that's unclocked where you are responsible for sending out frames when is appropriate. Now, if you do unclocked mode, what's really cool about that is if you're just running that in a super tight loop and you are not waiting, NDI will totally do 4K 500
Uh-huh.
and your computer will hate you, but it will work.
But it will work.
And vMix somehow doesn't fall over.
That's impressive.
It's
That's really
actually kind of
impressive.
cool.
Yeah. So
It's
you've
actually
stress tested some of the tools we've all heard and love to make sure that they work as well as they can. vMix works well. What have you managed to crash? Or maybe you don't want to name and shame anything, but have you managed to crash some stuff?
so I haven't managed to crash. I'm just trying to think which programs I have managed to crash with Chaos Generator.
Hmm.
I find so there's a lot of internal protection that the SDK has against bad frames.
Right.
Like it will do its absolute best to not, but every now and then, and I'm gonna this there was a this is a known this was a known issue, and this has been long since resolved by the vendor. But there was some bird dog cameras that I think it was like the P200s that had firmware that for a while that would just they might send out bad frames.
Ah.
And actually, the developer symptom of that was it was valid enough that NDI would actually try to decode, the SDK would try to decode it and give you the frame,
Hmm.
but there would be no actual data in it. And
Right.
it would just, the symptom would be that like vMix or Studio Monitor or whatever receiver application would just like close.
Right.
Or it would be running, but it would disappear, right? And that's also where you got into vMix's faulty encoder mode, FEIM.
Yeah. Okay.
So you could, so like if that, if you had an encoder that was, and it's not like technically any, if you do some wacky stuff, like you can, this is what I really want to explore with the next version of Chaos Generator, which is going to be
Hmm.
HX, which is, okay, what if we just barf into the frame data and send that to NDI? Like what happens?
What happens?
Like what's going to happen? Okay, I'm going to do
Hmm.
that. Um, but today, what I've got Chaos Generator, what it allows you to do is say, give me a source that's X by Y that runs at the following frame rate. You can have it clock internally, you can unclock everything and just say, okay, run as fast as possible, introduce the following amount of lag or jitter, stall the stream for 500 milliseconds, see what
Mm.
happens. So for example, if I spin it up here, I'm
Yes,
going
please do.
to let's see, not clocking at audio or video. Now, I have it set to 60 frames per second.
Hmm.
So, um,
Cool. Appreciate it. Right.
have Chaos Generator running, and I'll flip to the correct studio monitor. That would help. So what Chaos Generator will do is just send out frames. I send it out numbered frames here and just repeats that with a gradient, right? Chaos has been generated. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
So,
So at this point, you could still just use it as like a generator.
yeah,
I could use this to test signals, right?
for sure. But
It wouldn't
now
have to
let's
be
say
chaos.
I wanted to stall the stream. Like what would happen if I just stall the stream for a second? There we go.
Nope.
So it's
Maybe you
like,
could
okay,
zoom in on your terminal just a little bit.
yeah, sure.
Ah,
So
perfect.
yeah, so what I'll do is I'm going to say S1000, and
Hmm.
that'll just stall the stream for 1 second, 1,000
Nice.
milliseconds, right?
Hmm.
And then I've also got, and then for some of the launch options, I also have the options if you are overriding the clock. So you just put it into unclocked mode to say, here's for the jitter between frames, here's the lower bounds, here's the upper bounds, and for each frame, just generate a random amount of jitter that is between the low bound and the upper bound,
Got it.
right? So you can simulate what happens when sources misbehave.
Hmm.
Where I found this being the most useful actually was determining in vMix, and I need to pull up my documentation for this. I actually don't have it handy, but you can actually use this to figure out like for source dropped, renderer dropped, resync, all that. In vMix, you see in the statistics window, it'll show you all the statistics about a source. You can actually use this to figure out like which, like, if you're running too fast, you're running too slow, like when is it going to, like when is vMix going to drop frames or report, say, a frame drop.
Got it.
Um, Internally, vMix does a lot to, this is my conjecture. I'm going to give some conjecture about vMix. If I'm wrong, please somebody call me out about this, but this is just conjecture. It seems that in order that vMix does there seems to be some sort of an internal scheduler inside of vMix when it's receiving NDI frames, and it figures
Mhm.
out based on frame times when it should get the next frame and then present those. And you can get a source, and sometimes you may have a source drop, and it seems to be if you have a source that doesn't have kind of a reliable clock, and you have frames that arrive late.
Okay.
Again, way I discovered that was through Chaos Generator, or inferred that, excuse me, is through Chaos Generator, and again through those generic OEM cameras.
Got it.
So if you want to create sources that misbehave or do weird things, Chaos Generator is the way to do it. It looks like the link has already been posted in the chat on YouTube.
Yes.
But in general, if you want any of those tools, you can go to github.com/tractusevents,
Hmm.
and all our repositories all our publicly available tools are there, and they're also available on our website, tractusevents.com.
And all of those sort of parameters that you're punching in there to the command line, they're all nicely documented on the GitHub as well, right?
Yes, they are. I did. So I will also admit that I had ChatGPT help me
Hmm,
generate that documentation,
fair.
but yeah, and I actually had to use that documentation to remind myself how to use that program because it's been a couple days.
Yeah, they all document. You think you're documenting for other people, and you're actually documenting for yourself.
Oh, all the time.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah, that's Chaos Generator. If you want to make a source that misbehaves on command and you want
love
to
it.
deliberately introduce stalls, like a big one for me is just being able to say, okay, what happens if I delay the stream for 75 milliseconds? Like what will happen?
Yeah,
And also is a good way to tell you like, okay, how does this video reliability or this connection reliability indicator in Studio Monitor, like what actually seems to influence that guy? So if
yeah.
I
I've
keep
never really
stalling,
noticed that much because it usually just is fine. So it's interesting to see.
yeah. So yeah, lots of fun to play with that one.
That's cool.
Again, command line tool should probably put a UI over it someday that's not command line, but
Oh yeah,
priorities.
yeah. And speaking of priorities, then we're going to do a lovely segue to what I would consider your more readily downloadable and usable tool. Not to put anything against the other ones, but it's just more the average person that may be watching this live stream or a video later that we post about it might just want to try out a tool that they can click, download, and go with. So, Multiview for NDI is the last one we're going to talk about today. Tell us a little
Yes,
bit
sir.
about how you got to this point and why is there even a Multiview for NDI out there? I'm surprised. We just talked about this before. There's no official one from NDI, right?
So as far as I know, there's no official one from NDI
Hmm.
unless you count a TriCaster, in which way we could say there's a roundabout multi-view for NDI,
Okay,
which is
yeah,
just go buy a TriCaster, but
I'll give you
they're
that.
kind of they're separate business entities, so like whatever, that's a thing. There's a ton of really good multi-views out there. Like first off,
Hmm.
it's like there's and you can make multi-views with a whole bunch of different utilities too. Also shout out Central Control, Joe Max, Central Control, the NDI routing and multi-view stuff that he's got in there with being able to send out your layout as a HTML web page and
Mm,
tune
that's
into
neat.
that is really cool. So
Yeah.
by the way, if you've not seen Central Control 5, go check it out. It's really cool. But like there's a bunch of multi-views out there, but like any good developer, I was like, let's not look at Google first. Let's just write code and solve the problem that way. So I wrote a version of Multiview that was just Windows only, and I threw it up on my Gumroad. And I was like, okay, let's see if anybody wants this. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh, okay, this is like hockey stick growth in terms of
Nice.
subscribers and
Great.
downloads and everything. I'm like, okay, clearly people want this.
Hmm.
And so I built a second one, and that was the one that I released. I think that was released sometime in 23 or 24.
Wow.
And that was the older one that ran. It was a cross-platform one that runs on Windows, Mac, and Linux.
Mhm.
The biggest limitation that I had with it, though, is it did a lot of internal color conversion from RGB to YUV, which
Okay.
really hampered the performance of it. And to support, and it also required a GUI. So every
Mm.
time you launched a Multiview, it would launch a GUI instance. We kind of hacked in headless support, but it was not ideal. Like
Right.
it was pretty janky. And so I went, okay, can we make a version of Multiview? Can I make a version of Multiview that is headless, number one, and number two, can we avoid the color conversions?
Hmm.
So I just want to make this as stinking fast as possible. And there was a third request, which was, can we make this run without GPU? Because the other two versions of Multiview, those required a GPU. And
Right.
anybody that's been running an AWS for more than 5 minutes knows that GPUs are jolly expensive, right? So I wanted to make a version of Multiview that didn't require GPU, so I spent a bunch of time just making a prototype rendering engine from scratch that
Wow.
ran in the native color format or the native pixel format that NDI likes, which is UIVY422.
Okay.
Built that engine, basically ported over as much code as I could, took out some stuff that didn't make sense in the old Multiview, and created the latest version, which is fully headless, runs on Windows, Mac, and Linux. Mac is not out yet because Mac is Mac as always. It will be coming out soon. And but for the Windows version, runs on x64. Linux is x64 and ARM64.
Got it.
So it'll actually run on a Raspberry Pi 5, and not too bad either.
Oh, nice. I'll have to try
Yeah,
try that out.
so I will say Pi 5 is, you're going to push the limits of it with more than like 2 or 3 sources, but it can run it,
Mm.
which is pretty cool.
That's
I've
pretty
also got
cool.
another little ARM PC. There it is. Little development box. This is based on the Rockchip RK3588.
Hmm.
I think this is Orange Pi 5 Plus. I forget the exact specs anyway. That runs Multiview pretty well. Like
Oh, wow.
it's basically 4x the performance of a Raspberry Pi. I think they retail for like 1 or 150 or something like that. But it's a decently little performant machine.
Cool.
Yeah, shout out Joshua Bernstein. Thank you for sending me that. I appreciate the heck out of that. Also, should just shout out Joshua Bernstein in general from Bird Dog, because like dude is an absolute wizard when it comes to networking, and has also been an incredible sounding board for figuring some of this stuff out. So thank you, sir, if you're watching.
Yeah, so there seems to be a pretty nice community around helping each other figure this stuff out, right? Because everyone's just trying to figure it out.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And also, like, I think what everybody's starting to recognize too is like is it's we're in a new era, right?
Hmm.
Like we're in a new era of production. We're not le I there's this I feel like there's always this argument about like we're leaving SDI and baseband behind and we're moving to AV over IP, but it's like no, we're just leveraging this technology for everything that it's worth now. It's like we
Yeah,
have options,
exactly.
right?
Yeah,
So
it's not one of the, it's like a lot of people say, like, I would never switch to vMix to do my whole production. I would never use software. I would never do this and that. But it's just like, well, aren't both an option at some point? Like, no one has
hey,
to just leave it
well,
all behind.
hi, can we talk about every converter box and what's running inside of it? Can I rant about that for just a second?
Go ahead,
May
sidebar.
I may I rant? Okay, let me grab a converter box. We need to talk about this in terms of software. Okay, here's the deal. So here's a random NDI converter box made by Bird Dog. By the way, latest firmware has HX support built in, which is
Mhm.
really cool. Or I think it has HX support. I don't know if it's coming, but is it out yet? Just trying to remember when I'm
Let's say
watching.
soonish. I
I
have
think
no idea.
it's either out or it's coming out soon. Either way, there's been some firmware updates for the old quads, which is like it's quite cool. Like being able to do dual encode, dual decode
Yeah,
is
nice.
quite useful. Regardless, inside of these, you can grab your screwdriver, open up one of these, and inside is a little computer. That little computer has an FPGA on the board too.
Mm.
Okay? in order to send out NDI frames. Why is the FPGA there? The FPGA is there to do really fast encode and decode to and from NDI.
Right.
And the little computer, little ARM board that's running in here is what is actually physically taking that frame from the FPGA when it is realized and sending it out over the network. So your little hardware boxes are just software, okay, with some extra stuff. And by the way, FPGAs are coded using a hardware description language like Verilog, or Verilog's the one that I know because I worked with it. But that's just code, and it tells the FPGA how to configure itself. So, yeah, it's all software. It's
sorted.
just abstracted for
Exactly.
you.
Exactly.
Anyway,
Anyway,
sidebar
back
over.
to your Multiview tool. That's where we were, right? Yes, it was.
Yes, sir.
So
Yeah, we were. Yeah,
start
we
from
were
the
on the.
start. Where, or not from the start. We've already went from the start. How does it work? What does it look like? What do people do?
So here's the main. So here's the default output of it. If you've tuned into just a couple sources,
Mhm.
I brought in H2R graphics on my top left viewer here, and I'm displaying the alpha channel on top right. By the way, this version that I've got that I'm previewing here, this is not out yet. I'm planning to release this later this week.
Oh, nice.
So you download. This is a paid tool, by the way.
That's
So I actually charge money for it because I like to eat. And by the way, everybody that's bought licenses for this, thank you,
Mm.
thank you, thank you. It's awesome. It's like every time somebody buys a license, I'm like, wow, they like me. It's
Yeah, I
really
love
cool.
it.
So thank you. Like, no, and seriously, thank you all.
Cool.
It's got a web, like this is the one that I probably put the most effort and time into. So it's got an actual proper web UI around it.
Right.
So you launch Multiview, you go to whatever your IP address is, port 8901, and bam, you're at the Multiview control screen. So I can click on any of these viewports, start assigning sources, like I'll bring in a camera here, I'll bring in another camera here. So I'm just clicking these viewports and then clicking which source I want to bring in. Now I can bring in the proxy feed or I can bring in the full bandwidth feed. By default, when you bring in a source, we go for the proxy feed. The
Right.
reason we do that is, for example, this is a 1920 by 1080 Multiview. If we bring in the full bandwidth feed,
Yeah, of
I'm going to be
course.
downscaling 1920 by 1080 down to, what's that, 640 by 360? That's just a waste of compute, right? Now, here's another fun fact. Again, this is where you get into some weirdness with some manufacturers. No shade to the Logitech Mevos. My webcam is actually a Logitech Mevo, but I'm going to switch between. So down here, I'll assign the Mevo to this slot here. So I've got the Mevo, my webcam, in my upper right slot here, and I'm tuned into the proxy feed. Watch what happens if I tune into the full bandwidth feed. Notice how the crop changed.
Oh yeah, it did.
Yeah. So in NDI, it's incumbent on you to figure out a proxy. You send out, each source is supposed to send out two feeds: a proxy feed, which is your low bandwidth preview feed, and your full bandwidth feed. But there's nothing that says they have to contain the same data. So the Mevo is kind of an interesting beast in that regard.
And what's the bandwidth like for the proxy versus that full bandwidth feed?
There's like no comparison. It's like tens of megabits maybe. And if you're doing an HX source, it's even smaller than that. I think typically sources will send out, if you've got a source that's say 1920 by 1080, your proxy feed will typically be something like 640 by 360, capped at 30 frames per second.
Okay, got it.
It's the original use case of it was really, it was meant for the TriCaster and being able to see all your Multiview previews, right?
Yes, of course. And in your case, it's perfect for exactly that purpose.
Exactly. So I can, for these small viewports, like the other advantage that we have with these smaller viewports too, and using proxy feeds, is if it's running at 640 by 360, if the size of the frame, or if the size of the box and the size of the source are the same, we take a specific code path that gives us even more performance.
Okay.
We don't have to do any scaling. We can basically just do a line by line copy, and that runs pretty quick.
Nice.
So And you may notice that this multi-view, I'm tuned into it over Studio Monitor.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that.
Yeah, so the old version of Multiview had a dedicated GUI window or dedicated window for every single viewer. The new version, I said, no, I want no GUI, I want no nothing. I just want to send out my NDI, my Multiview as an NDI source.
Exactly. So that's to be clear, then you're not actually viewing it on the computer that you're configuring it. You're actually pushing it back out again as a laid out NDI source that you can tune into on, for example, that bird dog box that you had there in your hands a second ago.
Yeah, exactly,
Mm,
exactly.
nice.
I'm going to bring up
Love it.
another source. I'm going to configure another source here. I think, which camera is that?
And these are all just random cameras just sitting in your house, right? Behind your
They're just,
shoulder.
yeah, they're random cameras that have increased my home insurance policy. Yes. Which camera is that one? I always forget. I got I got a lot of cameras here. It's a good problem to have.
It's not a terrible problem, yeah.
It really isn't a
I
terrible
have a
problem to
similar
have.
problem.
Okay, I found that one. So what I'm going to do, so
Hmm.
I've assigned one of the cameras to a multi-view output and I've right-clicked it. And you may notice in, depending on this, depending on how big this is, the border for this source has now turned to yellow.
Yeah, it did. Yeah, I can see that.
So I'm now going to control, so I've got
Ah,
pass-through PTZ as well
okay, on that specific source.
on that specific source. So, and to drive your point home, about NDI Multiview running on a separate machine. So
Hmm.
this is the laptop right here that is running Multiview, that is running router, and is running my HTML to NDI converter.
Right.
And then on my main machine is where I'm running H2R graphics, which is going
Hmm.
into Multiview,
Got it.
right?
Yeah, so
So
it's
again,
different machines.
yeah, different machines. Also, a feature that's coming out in the next version, you may have noticed this. I kind of gave it away a little bit ago,
Yeah,
which is fine, is being able to see the alpha channel of an NDI source if it has it.
right. That's nice. That's neat to
So
have.
yeah, so if I clear the
Oof.
if I take the title off, there we go. And then if I bring up the moving gradient, for example, well, it's all opaque, and
Yeah,
there we go.
awesome. I like that. And so
So
how do
that's a
you
fun one.
say, how would you choose which of the sources is the one that you're going to PTZ control? Is that done on the control end here, or is that can't be done on the studio monitor end, right? It has to be done here.
So it can't be done yet on the studio monitor,
Hmm.
and yet is a keyword.
Yeah, that is a keyword.
So I'm gonna leave it there. I
Okay.
just want to tease that one, but that support, I've got a mechanism in place that I'm planning on adding to do that, to choose which source you want to control.
Okay. Next time
I'm
we'll
also
dig into that.
Yeah, I'm also exploring. So one other thing that I've wanted to do is I want to figure out, and I think this might be just sitting down and doing and playing with router and multiview together is,
Hmm.
having different camera operators, operate different cameras, but just look at the same multiview instance.
Right.
But I think we could probably do that with a PTZ controller paired up with router or something like that. Like
Hmm.
there's options. I got to figure that out yet.
Yeah. Okay. You've got lots of
Um,
ideas.
yeah, there's lots of fun stuff for sure.
Mm,
Um,
nice.
yeah, so there's options coming for that. But yeah, pass through PTZ. Actually, the very original motivation for making this was because I had a bunch of studio monitor instances up
Yeah, of
to do
course.
PTZ control on live events, and I was like, this sucks.
So now
Because
you
like,
coded your own solution. I love it.
well, because half the time what I would do is I would forget which window was focused and I would move the
Yeah,
wrong camera, and
of
it's
course.
such a noob mistake, and I felt like such an idiot every single time.
Yeah, it's that feeling of moving the wrong camera is it
Oh,
doesn't go
it's
away.
the worst. Dude, it's the worst. It's just like, oh, we're live to air. No, don't move that camera.
Yeah, too late. It's too late.
Yeah.
And just to dig through some of the features real quick before we I don't want to miss out on the fact that there's way more built into this, right? So you can have many more multi-views than one, right? It's not just like this is your one multi-view.
Oh, yeah. You can run, so whatever your computer supports, like
Hmm.
the most common support question I get is how many instances can I run? And I say,
Right.
you can, as many as your computer will allow, like basically just start firing them up, assign sources, and see what happens.
Hmm.
Here's a fun one for you though. So let's say I add a second viewport. So I add a second viewer.
Right.
So I just hit the add button. I've got a second viewer here. I'm going to edit this layout. I'm going to say this will be a 4x4. I'll save these changes, get out of edit layout. And in viewer 1, I'm bringing in H2R graphics as a proxy stream.
Hmm.
If I go to my second viewer and I then bring in H2R graphics as a proxy stream here, I'm using the same amount of bandwidth.
Oh, wow.
So inside the multi-view, we figure out where does this source need to go. So if you're tuned, so you can assign that same output to all your different viewers, or you
Hmm.
can assign that source to all your different viewers, and your bandwidth is going to stay consistent. We're just
That's
going to
neat.
figure out which viewports and which viewers need to get that frame data.
Okay, that's really cool.
Yeah.
And you're showing the debug here just as a nice little peek into what's happening.
Yeah, so being able, so I also include the debug tab. This shows you, it's like, okay, how many receivers have we got set up? How many subscribers do we have? Like, what's the frame time kind of looking like how are we doing in terms of performance?
Right. And I see
Um,
API. There's an API tab. Tell us about that about?
so built in
Ooh,
the API tab is a really nicely wrapped way to test out the entire HTTP API in the application.
got it.
So if you want to rename sources, if you want to see what it's like to load and save presets, if you want to, one that might be relevant as well is like say you've got your layout all set up. Like I had someone that was they had they had two viewers and each one was an 8x8,
Hmm.
right? So they had 8x8 is what, 64? If my math is right? Yeah.
Sure.
So they had 64 sources, but they had two viewers that they wanted to make with 64 sources each. So I added this route export layout so that they could build their source, they could build their first viewer, take the JSON for that, the
Hmm.
definition of it, alter it a bit, and then import it back in
Yeah, I see.
into the second viewer.
Oh, nice.
So everything that's going on, I should also mention this, everything that's going on in this UI, everything that's going on in this UI is just calling the HTTP API.
Of course, yeah.
So there's nothing in here. This has been built API first.
Nice.
There's nothing in here that calls into anything that's undocumented, right?
Right.
It's all like the entire API that is everything that the API can do, and I think even a little bit more, is surfaced in here.
Nice. That's great.
So including getting that debug route. And if you want to just, and you can come in here and actually try this out with different parameters. So if I say try out debug, hit execute, it'll give me these results back,
Nice.
right? So, or if I wanted to, for example, if I want to create a caption or if I want to hide and show, I can do that. Speaking of, let me just add, I'll go into edit layout here. I'll add captions. Now, caption,
Yes.
UMD, kind of same thing. I'll get rid of the text here and I'm going to put an expression clock 24. We'll do, what color text should we make it? Red?
Sure.
Cool. We'll make it red and we'll go font size 72 for good measure. Let's use a nice monospace font as well.
Hmm.
And I'm going to copy this code for the API calls. I'll show you that in just a second.
Hmm.
We'll save the layout changes. And I will now tune into, or this might actually be a good time to introduce router, right?
Oh, absolutely.
So in here, so you may have noticed that if the astute viewers may notice that my NDI source that I'm tuned into in this studio monitor has been consistent the whole time.
That's true.
The way I've been switching those sources is by using what's included with every license of Multiview for NDI, which is my router. And again, this is just an HTTP driven router. And let's see. So if I switch to viewer 2, there we
Nice.
go. So I'm now switched to this viewport. I'm now switched to this viewer. And I've now got an auto updating clock that's going on my second viewer.
Hmm. That's really
Now
nice.
let's go back to the API for just a second. I'm going to pull this out and go back to this. I'll set them a little bit side by side here. We'll go to the API, and I had this caption, for example.
Hmm.
Now this is running on my second viewer. I'm going to hit try it out. So this is running on viewer 1, starting from index 0 because I'm a programmer. And I'm going to hide this caption. I'll hit execute, and there we go. The caption is now hidden.
Right.
And
Nice.
so I can then do the same thing. I'll come back in here, try this out. Viewer 1, caption code this, execute, it's back.
So you
Now,
could
how
just
can you have you can
set
have
this
some
all up
fun
in
with
like
that?
Companion or something and call these APIs
Yeah, exactly. You're getting it.
one step ahead.
You're a little step ahead. This is one of my favorite things to do actually. Is I'll come in here, I'll create a trigger that'll run every second. And this will be Tractus Laptop 5, 'cause that's where that's running. Viewer 1, caption, hide this.
Hmm.
And I'm going to set up a trigger that'll run once per second that will basically blink this clock. Show. Let's turn it on, test in production. Is it
Come
working?
on.
Probably not, because look at
There it
that.
is.
Oh, because I don't have a delay between these.
Oh, okay.
This,
So the
that would
fact that it
help.
worked at all. Oh,
Hey, look at
nice.
that, it's
There you
blinking.
go.
So that's fun. So you could use that to say, hey, you're not recording, right?
Yeah, that's true.
And Michael Lang just said, now you can use Tally Arbiter to automatically update labels based on TSL UMD data. Exactly
Yeah,
that.
exactly.
Exactly that, good sir. So that's when I joked on LinkedIn the other day. I was like, dude, when I wrote this feature, I was just looking at a picture of Michael Lang. I was like, what will he need?
What did he want?
Let me show you something else while we're at it, actually.
Do it.
So this is something that's new that I have not talked about yet,
Uh-huh.
which is
Exclusive.
exclusive, which is adding images to your layouts, adding
Nice.
PNGs. So I'll grab a random PNG from my desktop. Let's do Forest City Road Races logo. Why not? So I'll deselect that. I'll save changes. And so now we have the ability to let's see. Hey, I crashed it. Cool.
There we go.
Let's take a look here. This is why
The
this
old
feature's
live
still in.
demo.
I've got my Bill Gates moment here. Hey,
You
look at
got,
that. It hard crashed. Cool.
you got this far without anything, so
I
this
got
is
this far without crashing things, so I'm feeling pretty good about that. And this is a newer feature. Like I just finished writing this probably a day or two ago. So I'll
okay. We'll
relaunch
forgive
this.
you then. Michael here saying, I feel seen.
I feel seen.
Literally
So
watched.
there we go. All right, so I got that going again. I'll add that layout again. Let's see. Oh yeah, I'll have to clear that one out. But yeah, I broke it. Cool. We broke it live. See, I'm not always the
Woo.
best at this.
Love it.
That's okay. We're good. You'll also notice on this version that there's a little bit of a hitch on startup where we say generating Y, UV, and alpha lookups.
Hmm.
So the reason that we're doing that internally is we do have support internally to display PNGs. So we
Hmm.
got this. So we got the ability to display PNG images with alpha.
Right.
But we also now have the ability, if I add a caption, I say the fill RGB is going to be FF 75, so semi-transparent
Hmm.
fill, right? And I say this is going to be my cool caption with alpha. I'll make that size 72, for example. 72. Come on, Elias, you can type. I'll save those changes. I will come back to my viewer. I'll come back to this. So this caption is being rendered with alpha transparency, right?
Yeah.
Now, alpha transparency to do on CPU only is really expensive.
Mm.
It's very computationally heavy. It sucks. This is, of all the parts of the engine that are slow, this is the slowest doing
Wow.
this. Like super slow. The hacky workaround that I came up with to make this render fast is back in the day when I was a young person just programming, starting up programming. My grade 12 physics project was a series of Game Boy Advance games. And one of those games was a simple ray casting engine.
Hmm.
Yeah, ray casting. Kind of like think Wolfenstein 3D, right? Or Doom. Um, the problem with that is in order to properly do ray casting, you need a lot of trigonometry,
Right.
sine and cosine, for example. And the Game Boy Advance processor, the ARM7 TDMI, did not have any native routines for sine and cosine. So you'd have to do that in software, and that's just you'd get like one frame every 3 seconds. But you can, but think about this. If I want the sine of a 90-degree angle, that's going to be the same every time.
Right.
And if I want the sine of 400 and let's 360, if I want the sine of 450, well, that's just sine of 90. So if I do angle mod 360, I know that my input is going to be within a certain range. And I also know that for every input, I'm going to get the same output, right? Or I'm going to get a constant output per input. So if I say sine of 0, I'm going to get whatever. Sine of 1, I'm going to get whatever. Sine of 2, I'm going to get whatever. Well, it turns out that the same thing is kind of true for when you're doing alpha blending with YUV pixels or
Hmm.
macropixels. So for a given luminance, brightness, to blend the two, you take your source times whatever your alpha is, and your destination is going to be your 255 minus alpha, right?
Hmm.
So you can pre-compute both of those. Your alpha's only ever going to be between 0 and 255 if you have 8-bit
Right.
alpha. So why not just compute those ahead of time?
So that's what you're doing.
That's exactly what we're doing. But then
Nice.
you're thinking, okay, well, what about the chrominance data? What about the chroma
Hmm.
data, UV? Well, it's the same thing. You can kind of pre-compute that. Now, if you pre-compute YUV times all the alpha combinations, it takes up an ungodly amount of RAM.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But it turns out that if you just compute Y and then you compute a lookup table for U and V, it takes up way less RAM.
Yeah, makes sense.
Way, way less RAM. The trade-off is the performance is slightly worse. It seems to be slightly worse versus if you did a YUNV lookup. Actually, no, I can't even say that because I haven't tested that yet. Because I haven't dared to find out what happens if you just allocate 4 gigs of continuous memory for a lookup table. And in fact, I think it could perform worse because it wouldn't. Because one advantage with the lookup table is that depending on the machines that you're running on, that entire lookup table, so UV, so 255 times 255 times 255, what is that off? I can't do that off the top of my head.
No chance.
So
Insert big
255,
number.
255, 255. So 255 to the, like 255 to 3 is only 16 million, right?
Hmm.
So you need that many bytes, 16 megabytes. What's the level 2 or level 3 cache of a modern processor these days? This will
No
easily
idea.
fit in CPU cache,
Mm.
right? Whereas 255 times all 3 is going to be 4 gigs, I think. Yeah, 4
There you go.
gigs-ish.
Good
4
math.
gigs and change. Like that's not fitting in level 2 or level 3 cache,
No.
but those smaller lookup tables will. So I'd be willing to bet that the performance of these smaller lookup tables would beat one gigantic lookup table.
Yeah, smart. Smart solution.
So that's how we're doing that. Now, I do have a version of this this version is kind of the naive version of doing the alpha blending, but I do have some prototype code that uses what's called SIMD instructions, single
Hmm.
instruction multiple data, which basically allows you to operate on like 128 or 256 bits at a time, excuse me, which in YUV world translates into operating on multiple macro pixels at the same time. That version is currently broken, but it performs a lot faster than this version does. And I do want to
Currently
get
broken
that going.
is a key term in there.
It's still broken because I've got a couple edge cases that I need to sort out, but I'll give you one other example of why the SIMD instructions are really important though, which is one of the most expensive operations is filling before we draw out each frame is just filling the frame with black to clear out the canvas.
Okay.
That takes a lot of time.
Mhm.
The most naive implementation where you're just writing a black macro pixel, you're manually doing that. That can take up to a millisecond in some cases.
Mhm.
If you're doing 60 FPS, that's an eternity, right?
Yeah.
If you know that you're going to be writing the same pixel every single time, you can take advantage of that, do 64-bit writes, and that shaves it down to about 170 microseconds.
Wow.
But then this is where SIMD really comes in and kicks, you know what. On this system, if I use an AVX2 based implementation, which is a specific type of instructions, that time goes down to 90 microseconds
Wow.
to fill the whole scene with black. That's the kind of performance that this is another sidebar too, which is I think this is the kind of performance that we're leaving on the table in some cases.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I talked about this in the launch party that I did for the new Multiview.
Yeah, that was
One of
great.
one of the laptops that I've got behind me, it's a ThinkPad T460 with like a 6300 i5, like not a powerhouse by any means. Did maybe 20 frames per second on the old Multiview. This one now with a couple sources can easily do 60. Like
Wow.
we're railing the CPU hard, but it's usable again, right? Like it's actually usable.
Extremely.
So I think there's in some cases there are performance gains that we could see in software that we are leaving on the table. But that's a geeky sidebar for another
Yeah,
day.
that's another geeky sidebar. But
Total geeky
speaking
sidebar.
of that launch event, I noticed that that's posted on your on the website for Multiview for NDI. So I
Yes.
encourage people to check that out to learn even more about the features of the tool.
Yeah.
But that was quite the deep dive into what it can do and even just your thoughts about pricing and all that. It felt like it's just a really well produced, obviously, but a very well thought out launch party. So I really appreciated that. That was great.
Yeah, shout out to Mike Van Rossum and Luke Westlake, my producers. They were just they made it easy for me to do that session. So thank you both, gentlemen.
Yeah, I
Um,
saw Luke in the chat there earlier, so appreciate it.
that was it was let's talk about pricing too, because I think you and I both kind of I think anybody that's an independent software vendor, which is what we are, right?
Yeah,
We're independent software vendors. Pricing is the hardest thing to
first
do.
part. Yep.
It's the hardest part. And everybody, it was funny when I put out the poll, because I put out a poll on my LinkedIn and said, do you want perpetual or do you want subscription?
Yeah.
And if I were to stereotype for a second, everybody that was in sales or business development said subscription. And everybody else said perpetual.
Yeah.
And I will reveal where my sympathies lie here, and I prefer perpetual.
Mm.
And the reason I prefer perpetual is there is a cost to running a subscription model.
Yes.
And it's not a trivial one. And I think this is something that gets overlooked when it comes to software sales in general. And that just because when you put out a piece of software, it's, there's a certain expectation around support, there's a certain expectation around how long you get to use it. And there is this weird movement. There's been this movement for a number of years to go away from a ownership model to a rental model.
Mm.
And the way that it was originally marketed, if we go back to kind of the origins of how we got to AWS and Azure and cloud compute and all this other stuff, the idea was, companies used to build out massive data centers for themselves, but those showed up on the balance sheet as capital expenditures, right? Which meant for taxes that you could not deduct the full value of that data center that tax year. You had to write it off over a series of years. And Amazon, Google, Microsoft came by and said, hey, rent our servers. This goes from CapEx to operating expense. And now it's like a car lease. It's like you get to write off the whole thing every single year, right?
Right.
And then we kind of got into this weird zone of like, oh, Microsoft, Google, and Amazon do it, so every software is now going to be a subscription. And that kind of doesn't work for our world.
Mm.
Because so here's the mentality, and I spent a lot of time thinking about this. And one of the reasons I think the subscription model doesn't work for our world in many cases is because you think about live AV, you think about live productions. In many cases, you're going to certify a build, right?
Right.
You're going to create your build, you're going to create your setup, and you're going to certify and say like, okay, we know that these versions are dialed in and they work. And in some cases, we are not going to touch this.
Hmm.
Like it's just going to run. And a subscription-based model kind of assumes that you will always be on the latest and greatest, whatever it is.
Exactly.
And in some cases, that's just not the case.
No, you don't want to be.
You don't want to be.
Hmm.
And a lot of these products also assume that whatever it is going to have an active internet connection and can phone home.
Hmm.
It's like, well, what happens when the activation servers go offline? What happens when whatever payment host platform you're using goes offline? What happens when one day, we decide, like, down the road, like, I have to think, like, as a business owner, I have to think about these things of like, okay, what happens, like, what's going to happen to this product 20 years from now? Like, are people actually going to be able to use this?
Hmm.
And then I also put on my programmer hat and specifically my hacker hat. Okay.
Yeah.
I owe the reason I learned so much in my childhood about software development, the reason that I was able to learn so much about just everything I did in computers was, part of it was due to software piracy. Okay, let's all be real here. Like everybody that's a programmer has been down that path. I'm just willing to admit it in public. Like,
Exactly.
one of the reasons that Microsoft managed to, cut back on piracy of some of their products was because they started to say, F it, we're going to provide some of this stuff for free. Like Visual Studio was a heavily pirated product. I know that because our computer science teacher in high school gave me the CDs or the DVDs for Visual Studio 2002 and 2003 and said, here, fly at it.
Exactly.
And I was like, okay, can I make a copy of this CD? And he goes, I'm not going to look.
Yeah.
But no, but then Visual Studio 2005 came out and they released Visual C Express, Visual Basic Express, like they released Express editions, which were free to use and royalty free. And now they've gone even further and said, you know what, we'll release Visual Studio Community, and that's free. That's the main Visual Studio product. We can reduce piracy. We can reduce our support costs because it's not like the Express editions had stupid limitations, whereas Community doesn't. And the enterprise versions, that's a completely different discussion. I'll get past that. The point is that there's a cost benefit that implementing a subscription model is not the pathway to riches that you might think it is.
Mm.
It's not, and it also requires a lot of care and feeding, and it also means that you designing a piece of software that's going to be used in live production that has some sort of digital rights management or copy protection or something like that built in, or an activation system, that's a point of failure.
Mm.
And you want to have some level of confidence too that, like, if that fails, this can't bring down a show.
Exactly.
This cannot bring down a show. And that's like in the old version of Multiview, and I almost released a blog article that said how to pirate Multiview for NDI because it was just like, seriously, here's how you do it. Please don't.
Exactly.
Please don't, because like this actually costs time and effort to produce. But like if you are going to do it, here's how you do it. Because like if you are a programmer or you're a hacker, every program is open source.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a matter of how heavily do you want to dig in with your debugging tools, right? Like you can bypass, like, yeah, there's checks and balances, but eventually you can figure out how to bypass DRM because it's going to boil down to, does the software get the right, does the software get the right responses back?
Exactly.
I actually dealt with, it was a cosmetic product. I got approached by this random company in my hometown, and they were like, "Yeah, we got all these surplus like facial scrubber or massager things. Like it was some sort of thing to do like I don't even know what the heck it was. Like you
Yeah,
basically
what?
it did stuff to your face, and then like layers of skin would come off, and you
Oh,
look beautiful right afterwards. Like it sounds horrifying.
I'm sure.
But what was weird about it was after 10,000 uses, you were supposed to send the product back to the manufacturer and they would
Mm-hmm.
refurb it and you would get it back and it would be good for another 10,000 uses. Well, they sent me, and I got my hands on this device. They sent me the device and I got my hands on some of the firmware for it. That was just an internal check that looked at a couple different parameters and said, are we under the number of uses? And then, some checksum as well.
Mm.
And once you modify that stuff, you could basically reset the counter to zero and avoid spending like $10,000 to get the manufacturer to do that.
Right.
which is to drive home the point, like eventually you can bypass all this stuff. So for when I was this to get back to the whole point of like the licensing model for Multiview, the reason why I switched to perpetual, one is to acknowledge that, yeah, there are some people that just want to buy a license of this. They want to install a setup that's going to run for the next 3 to 5 years and they don't want to touch it.
Exactly.
And it's like, okay, they have their certified build. Cool. You own it. Like, have fun. And there's upgrade, and there's going to be upgrade options available. Like I'm finalizing those and getting those details out soon. But, but if you just want to buy the 2025 0401 release and run that forever, it's like, okay, cool, run that. Like nothing's stopping you. And then even if Tractus disappears tomorrow and, we say, okay, we're no longer selling this, you still own the software.
That's
Like you
nice.
still use it. You're still allowed to. We don't go away. And yeah, I for one blame Adobe for this model. Yeah, they
Yeah,
made a
Nick
mint
said
with
that.
it. Yeah, Nick. Yeah, shout out Nick. Hey man. Um, yeah, like a lot of companies went to this, subscription model because it looked like the pathway to riches, but it's like, at some point it is nice to kind of go back to owning software. So I feel like it is a bit of a throwback in some ways to a simpler era when we said, hey, here's a novel concept. How about you give me some money
Mm,
and I'll give you a thing that you just own now?
yeah,
Like I wanted to do this in time for NAB. I just didn't have enough time to do it. I wanted to create a box copy of Multiview for NDI
oh, that'd be so cool.
and just give it away on the show floor.
Yeah,
I was like logistically I just did not have enough time, and I wanted to have it themed like a Windows 95 box.
that's a really good idea. I might steal
It's
that
like,
idea for the future too.
yeah, I
That's a
was,
great idea.
oh dude, I want a box copy of H2R graphics.
Yeah,
That'd be really
done.
fun.
That'd be so much fun.
That'd be like a retro throwback with system requirements on the side,
Exactly.
really cheesy screenshots at 640 by 480. That'd be awesome.
That'd be so cool. That's a good
That'd
idea.
be a lot.
Well,
So
that's good reasoning, and a nice solid logic to the pricing system. And I know that watching the stream and seeing the live chat while you announced the product, people were delighted to hear about your decisions. So I appreciate
yeah,
it.
and it was I made that decision because of the response. It was like, okay, yeah, I understand the desire for subscription from a sales and business dev model.
Mm,
Recurring income is nice,
mm,
but if that's not what this market wants, then what are we doing? Like make it perpetual.
yeah, makes sense.
And if people want to upgrade, give them an upgrade path, which is basically a subscription by another name. It's just
Yeah,
so maybe that's okay. So I've been struggling with a way to describe this. So it's subscriptions are kind of like you have to opt out of them.
mm,
Like if you don't want that subscription to renew, it's a lot of subscriptions are really sneaky like that, where you kind of have to
exactly.
find the way to opt out.
Yeah,
Whereas a perpetual license with an upgrade option is much more of an opt-in solution.
exactly. You're choosing to come back, and it takes some work on your part to then pay more money.
Yeah, instead of
Mm,
me just relying on your credit card renewing, which is gross.
yeah. Exactly. And I definitely, for all the software and services that I offer, I have all the versions now. And obviously I get responses either way for each of the options, this costs a lot in one go. Couldn't I just pay it monthly? Or I love that I can just pay this once. We also have like one-time event offers for gear and run in studio as well. And people sometimes say like, oh, the price, for example, on gear, I may as well just pay for a month. Why would I not just subscribe monthly rather than pay one time for this one-time event? Um, but I get the same amount of comments saying like, "Oh, I love that I can just buy this once, get one invoice, don't have to cancel, can put that invoice in this job and say this was for that job." So it really is like it does depend on the tool, I think, but I totally agree with the reasoning that um specifically for these download tools like in my case, H2R graphics or PlayIB in Jonas's case, or for you, the multi-view, it just makes sense that something that you download and especially use offline, just
Mhm.
you download it and you walk away and it works when you open up the computer tomorrow.
And it's also like wanting to reduce the it's reducing points of failure too.
Hmm.
Like for me, the final license system that's going to get implemented where you put in a license key, like that's again, I will, if you're a hacker, have fun, go reverse engineer it, like whatever. It's karma. Karma is karma. I understand.
Exactly.
But like, but with, with that, I have coded it, and I coded the older version in a way that made the assumption that if activation fails for some reason, we assume that the activation server is offline and it's not because of the user.
Right.
In other words, we must never break a show because activation failed.
Right.
That is a fundamental principle, and I will stand by that. Like barring a solar flare that flips a bit, okay? Like that, which did happen. There's an amazing speed run of Super Mario 64
Uh-huh.
where the reason it was eventually discovered that the reason that so Mario clipped through a surface that he wasn't supposed to clip through, which saved off like 30 seconds on this run, like it was a world record run, basically.
Hmm.
It was something like that. It was crazy. But they found but nobody was able to replicate it. And everybody was like, this person cheated, this person cheated. It was eventually deduced that they were like, the only way this could have happened is if this flat had a bit flipped for it being solid. And
Weird.
the current hypothesis is that this person didn't cheat. It was just a random event of like a solar flare or something
That's
that
cool.
flipped that exact bit at the perfect moment.
That's really cool.
So like, yeah, you can't ever get away from any of that stuff, but I do try to keep the licensing and DRM part of Multiview is as lightweight as can be, and is built
Nice.
with the assumption that if there is a failure in it for some reason, that it must not bring down the show.
Right. Smart.
Yeah,
Cool.
I try.
Yeah. And I appreciate you coming on here and telling us all about these things. I think is GitHub the best way to find these tools, or do you have like a place where you like to send people? Do you have a newsletter as well, and LinkedIn and all that good stuff?
So yeah, I'm active. I'm active on LinkedIn. I post a lot there. If you download any of my tools off of Gumroad, you get added to, I think it adds you to like a subscriber list.
Right.
That's all opt out. So if you don't like emails from me, just opt out of that stuff. If you buy any of our products off of, like for example, if you go to multiview for NDI.com and grab a
Hmm.
copy like that, you get added to the customers list there, and I send out stuff on occasion there.
Cool.
Best way to follow me, honestly, is on LinkedIn. I just post a lot there.
Yeah, that's what I do.
I'm chronically on LinkedIn.
Hmm. That's great.
That's the easiest way. All the tools I make are available and listed at tractusevents.com. There's a whole software section there,
Cool.
which I believe includes links to, yeah, it includes links to all the different utilities plus the Multiview for NDI. Should mention that Multiview for NDI, if you do purchase a license for it, it includes router for NDI as well. So I find they pair up really nice with each other. Like a big use case that I do actually is I will use, uh, for some of our live productions, we'll have Multiview powering the downstage monitors.
Hmm.
Like we'll have 2 or 3 of those going. And then I will set up router to send like the remote presenter to this monitor, and notes feed this one plus a timer, and I'll be kind of punching what's going on the DSMs using router as opposed to setting
Nice.
sources in Multiview.
Right, right, right. That's really good. That's smart.
Right? So it's like, so you would come into, you come into router, create your slots. By the
Hmm.
way, this is all HTTP driven as well. So you can automate this stuff.
Nice.
But set up all your output slots and then assign them to your Multiview viewports, and then just switch everything using router.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's neat. Yeah, that's a nice little added benefit of signing up for the multi-view, the router
Yeah,
as
and
well.
again,
Love it.
the way that we're setting those sources, it's just a simple get request or
Ah,
simple put request.
uh-huh. Nice.
Slot, whatever the slot code is, set, and then whatever the source name is.
Cool. That's awesome. Yeah, best place to go to find out all this stuff is the website. I appreciate
I
you
think so,
taking the
yeah.
time coming on here, digging into the tools and a few sidebars here and there, but that's always appreciated. And live demos that mostly went well, so you got pretty lucky today, I would say.
Only one demo crashed. I'm pretty
Yeah,
happy with that.
that's pretty solid. And that was a insider sneak peek preview of a feature, so I mean, you can't really blame it. It's always going to
Yeah,
break.
that Yeah, that wasn't too bad. So I'll go debug that and figure out why that
I'll
part's
give you
broken.
something to do
But
for the rest of the day.
yeah, no, yeah, not like I don't have anything else to do.
Exactly. No, I appreciate it. And Jonas, thank you so much for keeping. I was gonna say keeping quiet, but we didn't want you to keep quiet. But we just made you press the buttons today instead of. I know you had. I'm sure you had lots to say about all this
You
fun
know,
NDI
it
stuff.
was quite funny. As soon as the chaos generator was running, I was like, oh, that's a little small tax. And like, I go to the one source that I didn't test in my whole preset, and it like cuts out Elias's audio
Oh
completely. And
no.
everybody is like, chaos has been generated. Ah. So,
Awesome.
So it
I
worked.
caused chaos. I love it.
yeah, that
Together,
was great.
together you caused chaos. I appreciate it.
Whee!
But thanks, Jonas. I appreciate you pressing all the buttons and setting all this stuff up on the cloud for us today. It's really cool. We'll do that more often. All
This was
right.
fun, gentlemen.
Yes. Thanks for watching. Thanks for the live chats. And if you have any questions as well after the fact, then do leave them in the comments below, and I can point them in Elias's direction just in case there's any things that are left unknown. But I would say find him on LinkedIn and pester him there about your not bugs and problems, more ideas and future improvements. That'd be great. And I'll
Fair
see
enough.
you next time, I guess, on the live stream. Thanks for watching. Bye.